Hey, this is WhyBeAre, and today I want to talk to you guys about the Nürburgring. If you don't know what the Nürburgring is, put simply, it's probably the most well-known motorsports complex in the world with a track that is over 12 miles long. And that track is going to be the focus of this video. And if you want more information on the track itself, too bad. Because from here on out, we're just focusing on the track in video games. Because the Nürburgring has been in racing games for almost 45 years. Yes, there was even a game in the 70s that included the track. Sort of. We'll get into that more later. The neat thing about this track though is, if it's a serious racing game, it probably includes it. If the game supports mods, there is most definitely a mod that adds the track to the game. For example, we're currently playing BeamNG.drive, which is a game that has very good support for mods, and we're playing on a Nürburgring version that was ported over from GTR Evolution. So that's two separate video games coming together in a probably illegal way to allow you to race on the Nürburgring. And one day, a random thought popped into my head. What was the first video game to include this track? And surprisingly, the answer to that question isn't that simple, because you need to figure out what does it mean to actually include the track. For example, in 1975, there was a game called Nürburgring 1, which is believed to have been the very first-person racing game ever made. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any video footage to go with this. All I could really find were some of the original advertisements for the arcade machines. But looking at these advertisements, you can tell this is not the kind of game where they went out and looked at the real track and modeled it to be in the game. In fact, when you played the game, you were limited to only 90 seconds of gameplay. So there's simply no way it could have actually had something that in any way resembled the Nürburgring. It was just named after the track. Next up, we have Endurance, which was released in 1985, and it was available for both the ZX Spectrum and the Amstrad CPC. What's cool about this game is, as far as I can tell, it's the earliest game that includes the Nürburgring that can still be played on original hardware or emulation, so I can actually get video footage of it. The game starts you off where you customize your bike. I'm picking bright pink. Then we got to put a number on it, so I'll put the number 12. You could choose the name of your riders. I don't really care. You get a number for the other bike. He's number 1. Riders don't care. And next, we got to choose where to race. So obviously, we're going to go to the Nürburgring, and we're going to put on the easiest difficulty. And now we're one step closer to the actual gameplay, but we're still not there yet, because now we need to prepare the bike for the race. And you have this little animation where the dude gets off the bike, and your job is to tune it up. Okay, so what are we actually doing here? Well, we're upgrading the bike. So right here, we can tune the engine, and we want max power, and then also max MPGs. As for safety, I want as little as possible. Unfortunately, if you try to continue with absolutely nothing for safety, it won't let you. You need at least the bare minimum amount. Then we can go back to the important stuff. We want maximum speed on the handling. We want just the bare minimum amount of safety, because I don't care if my driver dies. It's not actually me. And then minimal wear so the bike lasts as long as it possibly can. We want the grippiest, softest compounds they got. And then we could change the rider up. You know what? I'm fine with the way they are. I'm not even really going to worry about doing any of the preparations for the next bike. So let's just skip ahead. Here we are with the race about to start. So what do we actually do when we race? Well, we don't actually do anything because we're not the driver. We're just the team that supports the driver, so we tell them when to do pit stops, we customize their bike as you saw earlier, and we tell them how hard to drive basically. That's what we do. So the actual gameplay, it looks like this. We watch the bikes drive by. So yeah, the game technically has the Nürburgring, but I'm looking for a game where you can actually drive on the track, and that track actually looks like the Nürburgring. So Endurance is not the game I'm looking for. Now, as far as I know, this was the first game to fulfill those requirements. This is Grand Prix Legends that came out in 1998. So this game is a little bit over 20 years old. And if we go and start up a single race, we have the option of choosing the Nürburgring. And unlike the previous game, when you go and do a race here, you actually race on a racetrack. Imagine that. And you look right here, you're a little bit cautious. Like, is it really? Yeah, you just hit the green flag down there and we're racing. And the first question, of course, is this actually the Nürburgring? It doesn't look anything like it. Well, you see, this game is supposed to take place in 1967. So the version of the track we're driving on is way older than what you're probably used to. And it can really throw you off because you start in a different area, so it doesn't even look or feel like the Nürburgring at first. Eventually we get to an area where it's like, oh, this is where I would normally start, and then everything starts clicking in your head where you're like, oh, I know what this corner is and I know where I am now, and then, oh yes, this really is like it's driving on the Nürburgring, but there are some definite differences, and it can be really hard to know. Is it different because that's what it was like in the 60s? Or is it different because in the 90s they didn't have the technology to properly recreate the track as accurately as we can nowadays using the laser scanning technology? And right about here is where I realized I know where I am now. Because this is where the start and finish line would normally be on the configuration that I'm most used to, which is the smaller version that does not incorporate the Grand Prix circuit. The one in Grand Prix Legends, though, does seem to include the Grand Prix circuit. So what we're going to do is we're going to drive a lap of the place, and then we're going to compare that to the version found in Forza Motorsports 7. I chose Forza because it has the Lotus 49 as an available car, and this is the exact same car that is found in Grand Prix Legends, so that's why it's a perfect vehicle to use, because you can use the scale of the vehicle for reference. And as you can see in the bottom left, it does use the full circuit layout that incorporates the Grand Prix track, so this is probably the best version to use for comparison purposes. Here we are in Forza, and there are just a few general things I want to mention. First off, there are rumble strips everywhere on the course. And one cool thing is I was actually able to look up footage from the races in 1967, and from that footage you can see the grass around the track is accurate to that time period. And one small thing I want to mention is I love the graffiti on the track. It gives it so much character. There's obviously going to be no way they would actually have the graffiti in a game from that time period, but man, if they did, that would have been amazing. Now for the next part of the question, what was the first racing game to have some of the graffiti on the ring? Maybe Gran Turismo 4. That's the first game I could think of, but that is not a research topic. So back to Grand Prix Legends, and officially, this is where the lap is going to start. Just because it's the most convenient place to start the lap. And I'm not going to drive super fast through most of these areas, because I really want you to be able to see the track. The only places where I'll go fast are on the really long straightaways where the track is basically yelling at you, go as fast as you possibly can, and it just feels completely wrong if you're not flooring it the whole way. So this first section that we've driven so far, it's decent. It definitely feels flatter on the road itself, and then you look at the surrounding areas and you got like these big cliffs on the side, which it just looks funny because I'm really used to seeing the guardrails just a few feet off of the grass. That's actually probably another reason why the course feels bigger and more wide open in Grand Prix Legends, because you don't see that strict barrier. You see grass that looks like it goes on for a long time. So if you fly off of the course, you'll just slide on the grass for a bit and then you could drive back on. Here, if we fall off the course, we're just going to crash into a guardrail. And it's pretty much the same story through this section, but one thing I noticed is when you go back and forth between the games like this, when I go into Forza, I can tell exactly what corner I'm in just a few seconds looking around at landmarks. In this one, if I look at any specific section, I don't actually know where I am. I have to do a little bit of driving, and then I say, okay, this should be this corner, so that means the following corner should be this. And then it usually matches up with what you expect. Here's one of the few places where you know exactly where you're at. And the elevation changes here feel pretty good. You got the little crest, and here comes the big one, got some air on it. That was beautiful, and you always gotta hit the brakes after you fly through the air. I don't care if that means you're going way too fast in the next corner like I just did there. You must maximize the air time. And if you think I did bad by braking after the air time there, you should see what happens when I use the same exact strategy in Forza. We fly a lot more and we just smash into the wall. There's not a chance. To be fair though, I was going like 20 miles per hour more to make sure I maximized the air time. And of course, after you do the jump, there's another section where you gotta floor it going as fast as you can. And another thing I've noticed is you really need to be more careful through here, because a lot of the corners feel like they come blind on you. And I think it's just because the camera is lower to the ground, so when there's an elevation change, you really can't see what is over the bump. So we're coming up to another landmark location. We got the bridge. And I really like that they have that. That's one of the things where they could have not included it, and most people probably wouldn't even know the difference, but they include it there. And it's just nice to have that landmark as a way to get your bearings. And another high-speed section. And again, you see, when they have the big elevation changes, they nail those down pretty good. It's the smaller elevation changes where you really notice things are just a little bit different, but given the technology they were using, they did a really good job. So this corner is weird though. You got trees jutting out all the way and no dirt on the inside. It doesn't at all look like the modern track. Because on the modern track, when you get to that corner, there's a big grassy area. Now in Forza, there are barriers there, so you can't just drive straight through the grass. Because if you want to go through these corners as fast as possible, yeah, really, the fastest way would be driving through the grass in a lot of video games. But Forza says, no, we're putting barriers here, so you can't do that. If you wanted to, you could drive straight through the dirt in Grand Prix Legends. Am I doing that? No, as you can see, we're staying on the track because I'm not trying to go as fast as I possibly can, cheating the corners if necessary. Again, it's a tour of the track. We ain't racing nothing. In fact, the biggest goal is just staying on the track. And for this next upcoming section, I really don't have much to say. It feels like a decent representation, and again, it feels flatter than what I'm used to because there's not as much detail in the track itself. So I'm going to take a look at something that makes me laugh. When we're driving along, you see barriers sometimes, like on the left side of the road right now, there's a barrier. That's not going to stop a car. There's no way in heck that would actually stop a car. It would plow right through it and keep going. Here is one thing that's kind of interesting. You saw there was a transition where we went from lighter colored tarmac to darker colored tarmac. It only lasts for a little bit, and then we're once again back to the lighter color there. I'm assuming that's one of the things that was specific to the 1967 season where they said, look, this part of the road was just repaved and you can actually see the difference. We're going to implement that, and then bam, they did. Because I have no other reason as to why they would have done that. And coming up to the left, you have this little checkered barrier that pops in, and I hate him. Normally there's dirt road right there, so if you go in a little too tight, that's okay, you'll just slide a bit. On my first take of this, I smashed right into that barrier. But that's all on me. What's not on me is this building in the corner. Because the building is here in Grand Prix Legends and in Forza. Although it does look pretty different. I don't know if that's because the building was renovated or it's just, hey, we're making a racing game. We don't care if the buildings on the edges of the track don't look quite right. Nobody's gonna care. Nowadays though, people probably care. So I would assume the buildings you see here are accurate to the current ones. And back to Grand Prix Legends, we have one of the first corners coming up where it really feels like it just doesn't fit. This corner is perfectly normal, and as we drive along, this should feel like a straightaway, but we have a very defined corner going to the right here. And if we run the same exact section in Forza, we exit the corner just as before, and we can basically immediately see the left-hand corner once we clear the crest. In Grand Prix Legends, it really feels like it's a right, then a left corner. In Forza, it feels like a bend to the right, followed by a left corner, if that makes sense to you. And hopefully it does, because it makes sense to me when I say it aloud. And then after that, we got another section that feels pretty decent. And I really don't have much to say about this section. It feels good enough. So why don't we have a quick talk about the game itself? In 1998, when the game came out, it probably had one of the most detailed, most realistic racing simulations on the market, which actually didn't work out too well for it because the sales were pretty bad. Compared to modern games, you can tell it's not as detailed as modern simulation racing games, but it still feels good to drive the car, and that's really the most important thing. I don't care if a game is super sim or arcadey. The thing that's important to me is, does it feel good to drive? And the answer for this game is yeah. And a fun fact about the developers of the game, it was developed by Papyrus Design Group, which was founded by a guy named David, and later on, he would go on to create iRacing, which is another very, very good simulation racing game. But that's going just a little bit off topic, so let's focus back on in Grand Prix Legends, which does a really good job of showing you why the track had the nickname the Green Hell. Because it's so much greener here without all of the extra barriers. You just got grass everywhere, trees everywhere. The name actually makes a lot of sense to me now. So coming up, we're going to hit the carousel, and, well, let's just drive this corner, and you're going to see it does have some angle to it, but, yeah, that just didn't feel right, did it? There's just not enough angle in the road to make it feel good. So for comparison purposes, here is the carousel in Forza, and the one thing they did get right is the lighter colored part of the road has a pretty good amount of angle that's pretty close, but then the darker part really flattens out around the edges. But here you see there's still angle on the darker part of the road, and that's really what makes it feel like such a massively banked corner, is the addition of that. With it flattening out, it just feels different and it doesn't look quite right. And out of the whole track, aside from corners that are completely different because it's supposed to be from 1967, That's probably the one corner that stands out to me as being the worst one. And that's actually a really good thing because, sure, it might not be perfectly accurate, but when you look at it, you can still tell exactly what corner it's supposed to be. And a lot of that is probably because they use two different colors on the road surface, which is distinctive enough where if you look to the corner from straight above and you see no depth, you still might be able to figure out exactly what corner it is. And here we have another big hill section, and it's always hard to tell exactly how steep something is because the camera angles are different. Maybe this one's a little bit lower, but it's pretty dang close to what you would expect it to be. And the sign coming up on the left is pretty neat because it tells you the name of the village that you're entering. Now, how do you pronounce the name of the village? Why you gotta ask me these questions? I'm just gonna embarrass myself, but if I had to guess, it's Eschbach. Yeah, that's wrong. I know it, but there's a guess. And then we had another sign we just passed up on the right, which had another village name. And this one, you know what? I'm not gonna embarrass myself twice in a row. There's a village, its name is on the sign. What does it say? Why don't you tell me? And I bring this up because I've never seen any other video game have signs like that. I just think they're kind of nifty, and then you understand why the corners sometimes have really weird names. Like, why is this corner called Xbox? Yes, I'm being really lazy, and I'm literally just calling the corner Xbox now. It's the perfect name for a corner because I'm playing with the Xbox controller while I'm racing. And in a few corners, we're going to be coming up to the little carousel. And unfortunately, it kind of has the exact same problem as the carousel where it just doesn't feel like it has the angle that it should. Especially right in the entry to the corner. When you're entering the corner, it looks really, really flat. It does gain some bank midway through the corner, but simply driving towards it, I don't actually realize that's the corner I'm driving to until I see the two colors in the pavement. And then I'm like, oh, it's Little Carousel. So the next corner is the Little Carousel. And you can see it doesn't look very steep as we drive up to it. It looks pretty flat. And then as we go through it, it does get some bank to it, you see. And it's not bad, but that entry, it looks very, very different. Again, for comparison purposes. Here we are driving up to the corner, and you can really see the banking in the corner as we drive up to it. The overall banking on the corner isn't that dramatically different. It's just the visuals. It looks really, really different. Really kind of a strange phenomenon. And soon we're going to be coming up to the big straightaway. And here's where we can do something really dumb. We can drive this thing side by side. Originally, the whole video was actually going to be in a format kind of like this, but I decided against it because it's kind of confusing to watch unless you have something where you're just driving on a really long straightaway, in which case it's pretty easy to watch. And the big thing I noticed is on Grand Prix Legends, it's a lot bumpier, and we actually get some decent airtime right here. Airtime! And I believe that is accurate, actually, because according to what I've read, there were jumps that were smooth from 1967 to now, and that's a very good candidate for that. And we're just flooring it the whole time in Grand Prix Legends, not letting up at all, which is not a good plan. Oh no, what have I done? Oh, I should not have been doing that. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and restart and drive back to this spot, and I'll be back once everything is in position. Okay, so I backtracked a little bit. We're right under the bridge, and these were the bushes we slammed into, and then eventually there is the fence that we got stuck on right to the right side. So continuing along through here, here's where things start to get really, really different. Going back to the very start of Grand Prix Legends, you remember when we first started and everything was just really weird and it didn't look like the ring at all? That's the part we're going to be coming up to. So this section here is a little bit different than what you're used to if you're just used to the main North Circuit. So here we have the straightaway, which is from the Grand Prix circuit. And this one is on the one in Forza as well, since I chose that configuration. But then when we get to the end of the straightaway, basically everything is different because we go to the right in Forza. Here, we're going to the left. And that's really why when you first start it up, it just doesn't even look like the ring. Because you basically start on this section that's nothing like any of the other video games before. And that really is the thing that makes this worth remembering. Because no other game out there is saying, oh, here's the version of the racetrack from 1967. And this is what it was like back then. I can't think of any other game that has this configuration of the ring. If anybody knows of one, do tell me, because I would love to know if anybody else has ever incorporated it. So anyways, that is a full lap of the ring from what I would consider the traditional starting point. And lastly, I gotta thank the people in my Discord server who honestly did the majority of the research for this video, because one time I randomly said, I wonder what the first video game that had the Nürburgring was in the chat, and then they basically came up with the answers for me. So thank you very much, you guys. It makes it easier for me not having to do any of the research. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. Till next time, this has been WhyBeAre, and remember, if you like or dislike this video, I will know. I can tell by how similar the track is. So do the right thing, and I'll see you next time. And I'm going to admit this now since we're done driving. This is a terrible video. I do apologize right now. So the problem is I wanted to make this video on the topic. Then I realized, you know what? It's kind of hard to talk when 90% of everything you're saying is, this is pretty similar but slightly different. This is also pretty similar but slightly different. But I do like easy videos that require minimal editing every now and then. Anyways, that's the real end.